the firm that I work at in Chicago. I oversee a team of attorneys and other staff members throughout the firm for one of the 3 revenue generating departments for the firm. One of my most meaningful works in my life is I spent about 5 years as a rape crisis advocate, working for rape crisis counseling centers both in Ohio and then here in Chicago as well. I graduated with my degree in political science with a minor in criminology, and coming into politics is something that I've always been interested in doing, and I'm thrilled to be here today. Personally, I live in Lisle, and I am raising 3 kids with my husband there, and we're thrilled to be raising our kids in DuPage County.
Thank you, Candice. Next, let's go to Eric Rinehart, who is running for the County State's Attorney.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the 6th District Democrats for inviting me and hosting this. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm running for Lake County State's Attorney. I always start by saying I am running to make Lake County safer and fairer. My focus is going to be on reducing violent crime, which has gone up in Lake County since my opponent has come into office 8 years ago. We need to focus on the long-term reduction of crime also by making sure that we expand our treatment and diversion programs, particularly for our young people. We need to make sure that all of the work we do in the criminal justice system takes into account the current scientific understanding about young people's development, and that's really critical to me. So we need to think about reducing crime in the long run. As a father of 2 boys, Sam and Teddy, 2 twin 6-year-old boys, I wish that prosecutors 20 years ago had thought more about how to reduce crime in the future. So that's something critical to my campaign, is thinking about that. Finally, Lake County has a terrible history of wrongful prosecutions, a tragic history. 7 to 8 men have been exonerated in the last 10 years. Those men were sent to prison wrongly for 109 total years. Those 7 to 8 men were taken away from their family. They were ripped away from their family. Those wrongful prosecutions not only have devastated their lives, but they've destroyed the trust between the people of Lake County and their courthouse. And I intend to restore that trust by ending the culture that led to those wrongful convictions and led to those wrongful prosecutions. Less important than the 109 years where those innocent men were sent to prison is the $54 million that taxpayers have had to pay because of those settlements. So that's critical, obviously, in saving money and going back to reducing crime in the long run. A little bit about me. I've been a defense attorney for 18 years. I started out at the Lake County Public Defender's Office in 2003 and started my own practice in 2008. I'm proud to say that even at this moment, I continue to be a public defender because I have a contract where I handle a few conflict cases for the Lake County Public Defender's Office. And so I'm very proud of my background. I think I've done about as much as a criminal lawyer can do. I've done an incredible amount of jury trials. I've also been in the appellate court and also the Supreme Court of Illinois, I'm very proud to say. So that's my sort of elevator speech, particularly when we talk about criminal law. I think it's important to think about other ways that a state's attorney can help in a county and bring democratic values to a county. The last thing I'll end by saying is Lake County itself has not had a Democratic state's attorney in 40 years. So Watergate was the last time that the people of Lake County elected a Democrat to this role. So reversing that is a challenge, but I think it's also something that we're going to be able to get done in Lake County in light of a lot of good work that the Lake County Democrats and elected Democratic officials have done there. So I look forward to having a more discussion about some of these topics.
Patrick, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Next, let's go to Jamie, who is running for Kane County State's Attorney.
Thank you. So I started my career 18 years ago. It was actually in New Orleans as a prosecutor down there for 2 years. I was primarily assigned to our juvenile division, but I did do some adult jury trials as well. I then came back to juvenile court where I screened a lot of cases for acceptance, and I also was in charge of a felony gun grant where we looked to see where kids were getting guns from, because the idea was to find the source and not necessarily punish the kid who unfortunately was involved in that. My husband and I moved back to Illinois after 2 years, and eventually I took the bar and I took the job at the Kane County State's Attorney's Office, where I practiced as a prosecutor for the next 10 years. I was assigned in pretty much every division: domestic violence, DUI, special prosecution for arson and auto theft, general felonies, drug rehabilitative courts, until the last 5 years of my career, where I headed the domestic violence unit. Throughout my career, I've prosecuted cases as low as traffic offenses all the way up to homicide offenses. I've supervised multiple people within the office. And I was also responsible for creating Kane County's domestic violence diversion program. This was a brand new diversion program, and it was not very widely popular in the domestic violence community because it appeared to be giving offenders a break on the crime. When in reality, what it did was allow the offenders to take accountability for their acts while giving the victims a true voice in the process. And it also got people into treatment a lot quicker, which made the environment safer for victims in general. And so I'm very proud of that program. It has a 75% successful completion rate, which I think is fantastic. I left the state's attorney's office and then I opened up my own practice. I did a little bit of family law, civil law, criminal defense. I eventually went to Prairie State Legal Services, where I represented victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and family law, protective order cases. And then I decided that I wanted to run to be the state's attorney because I saw an office that I had been extremely proud of stop taking into consideration the things that we truly needed to do to make an impact in the criminal justice society. And I know we're going to talk about that a lot more, but we weren't looking at mental health, and we were not looking at addiction issues, and we were looking at everything as statistics, and we stopped looking at them as people. We stopped figuring out how to get them out of the criminal justice system. And so that's when I decided to run to be the next state's attorney, because I knew that I could make a difference and I can change the way we think of prosecution as not who are we going to put in jail and who are we going to put in prison, but rather who are we going to get out of this criminal justice system and put them down the right path. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And last, let's go to Brittany Pedersen, who is running for Kane County Circuit Court Judge.
Thank you, Patrick. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brittany Pedersen, and I'm running for Kane County Judge. It's a countywide position, so anyone who resides in Kane County will have the opportunity to vote for me. I am currently a criminal defense attorney. I own my own practice, based in Aurora and in Elgin. And prior to going into private practice, I worked the Kane County Public Defender's Office. Prior to that, I started my legal career doing medical malpractice defense work for a mid-sized firm in Chicago, where I did a number of jury trials and defending doctors who'd been charged, not charged, but had civil negligence claims against them. Prior to law school, I attended Loyola Law School in Chicago, and prior to law school, I worked at the Attorney General's office, where I worked in the Crime Victims' Rights Division, where I worked on crime victim rights legislation, some of it that we see today, as well as worked with the Crime Victim Compensation Program that helps give money to pay for compensatory out-of-pocket costs that crime victims incur as a result of being a victim of a crime. I've been able to see the criminal justice system from both sides, given my criminal defense background, and then my time at the Attorney General's office. I've also practiced law in family court. I've done civil cases, as I said, in medical malpractice court, but also in contract dispute court sorts of cases. I am the mother to 2.5-year-old twin girls, and I live in Aurora now. I was born and raised in Elgin and have found myself back in Kane County after not living here for about 15, 16 years. And I couldn't be more honored to be back on my home turf, as I like to say, and with the opportunity to serve my community that I grew up in. And I am running for judge in Kane County because I believe that our judiciary needs to be reflective of the population for which it serves. We need diversity as far as race on our judiciary, gender, and age, and not just that, but legal experience and life experience diversity. And those are characteristics and traits that I'm going to bring to the bench here in Kane County. We need well-rounded judges in Kane County that reflect the values of the community at large. It's not often that in Kane County we have a general election, especially in a countywide race, where we have two candidates that allows the population to vote for. We are kind of lucky in Illinois that we get to vote for some of our judges, and some of the judges are appointed as well. That means that we should have a bench and we should have judges that are reflective of our community. And that's what I'm going to be striving to do. You will hear a little bit more about what my stances and beliefs are on some of the issues that we talk about. So I don't need to go into depth with that right now. But I am looking forward to having your support here for the next 5.5, 6 weeks that we have with the election, basically voting starting on September 24th. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Brittany. Now I am going to turn everything over to our moderator today, Michael Childress, who is a civil rights leader across a number of our counties. He's done such fantastic work, and he's had some great questions for the panel today. Michael?
Hey, guess what? My computer is up, so I'm actually happy. I was working in the background. Thank everybody for the introduction because it gave me time to work in the background. So thank you. First of all, I appreciate everybody spending time with us today. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to talk to you. The first thing I want to cover is the fact that the authors of the Declaration of Independence outlined a bold step for the United States and for America. It's based on the premise of liberty and justice for all. America needs to come to the grips with that did include people of color at the time that it was authored. In fact, when it was authored, we were considered 3/5 of a human being. So when we go to the Constitution, it doesn't really mean that it was written for us. The courts have historically been our best friend, though, and also our worst enemy at the same time. Candice, could you kind of expound on how you would ensure that justice would be colorblind if you become judge?
So I'm running for clerk of the circuit court, and that—
I'm sorry, that was for Brittany. I'm sorry.
That's right, that's perfect.
I got it mixed up. It's Brittany.
So you want me to answer first?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Everything you just said there, Michael, is absolutely true. The courts have been our best ally as African Americans, and it's also been part of the systemic racism that we've seen in our society. When elected, I'm going to be Kane County's first African American female judge. I will only be the third one in our history, with the second one only being appointed just earlier this year. He was actually my law partner. Our first one was appointed in, I believe, early 1994 and was then elected in 1996. It's been about a quarter of a century since we've elected another Black judge in Kane County. And this is a very diverse county with cities of Elgin and Aurora and Batavia in them. And so the fact that we have a bench right now that just lacks in diversity, we have 4 Hispanic judges, which is good, 2 of which were just recently appointed, and 1 Indo-American judge. We also only have 2 circuit court judges that are women. And so we have a problem with diversity. I know I'm dark in my car. I'm going to figure out after this question how to get light on me, but I'm going to keep going. What I can say is this: in my experience, I am an attorney who has represented people. I have stood by them and fought for their constitutional rights and their freedom for the last 10 years. And I know that I will bring that understanding, I will bring that experience to the bench. And I will look at each and every litigant in front of me as just that, an individual person that comes from an individual walk of life. And that their path to becoming in my courtroom, no matter what type of courtroom it is, be it a family law courtroom or a civil courtroom, they will get the respect they deserve, and they will have access to all of the protections under the laws of the United States and the state of Illinois in my courtroom.
Thank you. The next question is for Candice. Could a lot of people in the community does not actually know what the clerk of the circuit court actually does. Could you kind of give us an overview of that position and how it affects the people in the community?
Yeah. So the clerk of the circuit court, what it does is the number one question that I get while I'm out campaigning. It's the place where you would do all of your court filings. It's the record keeper for the court system. It preserves all the evidence. It calls juries. It's where you would go to pay certain fines. It's actually one of the larger revenue generating departments throughout the county. So a lot of the times when I'm out campaigning, we discuss, why does it matter if you're just keeping records, whether or not there's a Republican or a Democrat in this position? Okay. And here's my answer. As true for all positions, it matters on how you allocate your resources, what's important to you. And here in DuPage County, we are doing things that other counties are doing around us that can really help level the playing field for a lot of our community members. Things like expungement summons and amnesty days that help clear a pathway to jobs and housing and military entrance and rank. Programs like that are what I want to bring here to DuPage to really help our citizens here. And they're happening around us. And our current clerk doesn't have the same desire to do those things. So the real benefit to having somebody in this position that sees value in like expungements and having access to the court system in a meaningful and even pathway is why I'm running for this position.
Thank you. The next question goes to the two candidates, so both of you will get a chance to answer for state's attorney. How would you ensure that the public would have confidence if you were presented with the case of police misconduct? Because historically, people of color tend to not believe that the system is going to be fair when we've seen as many cases of police misconduct as we've seen in the community. And I'll start with Eric, and then we'll end it, and then with Jamie.
Yeah, so that's a really important issue in my race. Lake County very recently has had several allegations of police misconduct. A man named Abel Razilis, there's an investigation regarding his death. There's a man from 2015 named Justice Howell who was shot by the police. Lake County has several of these cases. So that having that trust is important. When I spoke a few moments ago to introduce myself, one of the things that's destroyed the trust in Lake County has been these wrongful convictions, these wrongful prosecutions, primarily men of color. And so those prosecutions and confirmed wrongful convictions have done a lot of damage. And so first we have to reverse that. We have to tell the people of Lake County and everywhere in Illinois that we're not going to stand for that anymore. We need to have a report. I think there needs to be a public report about why those 8 men were wrongfully convicted. And so that type of transparency is one way that I think we can restore that support, is by putting up reports. And it may sound kind of boring, but right now, believe it or not, there's no report or there's no published case opinion that says why these wrongful convictions happen in Lake County. There's nothing. There's no sort of record, if you will, about what happened. And so that's why I always start with that, because we can't learn from our mistakes if we don't identify them. But that sort of goes also to the issue of racial profiling, which is an enormous problem in Lake County. So if you can't name the problem, which my opponent won't do, if you can't name the problem, then you can't solve it. And so we have to measure some of these things. We have to have up-to-date crime statistics that show dispositions and that show arrests and break those down by race. The Lake County Jail is 35% African American tonight, but Lake County is only 7% African American. And a Democratic sheriff, John Heidelberg, who's fantastic, I believe is the first African American sheriff of Lake County. He put those statistics up, not the power structure that I'm fighting against, but the new sheriff. He put those statistics up to say what was going on in his jail. So we have to actually put up statistics so that we can measure these things. Because until we show that type of objective data, trust me, the people in my county are going to say, well, there's not a problem here, because that's what my opponent's saying. So that type of data, that type of transparency. And finally, I think the state's attorney can be a check and a balance in a system that we often talk about with police unions. There's been a lot of talk in the last few months about the power of police unions. But state's attorneys aren't bound by that. State's attorneys can take their own complaints from members of the community. State's attorneys can issue their own reports about what's happening. And so if there's a police officer who's involved in misconduct, he or she's going to have a problem bringing cases to me. So that's really critical that we are transparent about that, and that we also say that the community can come to us so that they're not immediately sent to a city hall and to a panel and to a board. Not that that's not important too, and not that I don't believe in the municipal government, but I think any type of check and balance, particularly if it's a bit asymmetrical, is very healthy for a political system and for a legal system. And so that's what I believe in.
Before we move on to Jamie, would you mind repeating those numbers again, the population versus the incarceration rate?
Absolutely, yeah. So Lake County is 7% African American, and the jail is at 35% African American tonight. And so it's 5 times. You're up 5 times as much as what the actual population is, and that's a reflection. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with the use of a cash bail as opposed to a different type of system. A lot of that has to do with, unfortunately, the police officers in our county and how they police different populations. There was a study that came out in the Chicago Tribune in April of this year that showed in 2018, you were 10 times more likely to be arrested in Lake County if you were African American for a marijuana charge than if you were white. So white people were being given tickets or warnings or saying, come to court on December 1st, while African Americans were being arrested and put in the car and taken to the jail. And so that statistic should have, in my opinion, that should have made everybody in the courthouse wonder what's going on. My opponent didn't mention it back in April, and he certainly hasn't been trying to stop it in 2018, since 2018.
Thank you. All right, Jamie.
So I'm going to echo everything that Eric said and also say that statistically, and I just heard this from our sheriff in Kane County tonight, we have 46% of the people in our jail who are African American, and our population is 6% in Kane County. So just as bad, if not worse. We're actually worse. So what's that?
You said 46%?
In our jail of African American men, and the population is 6%. So yeah, it's Eric is right that we need transparency, we need accountability, and the way that our system is set up now is if there is a police officer involved case, if that officer commits a crime, obviously the state's attorney's office is the body that can charge that person and prosecute them. The second way is that a complaint can be made through the police department, but again, that's an internal review through the police department to check to see what's going on. The third way is, depending on whatever happens, obviously you can file a civil lawsuit against anybody, but that is costly. You'd have to find an attorney who's willing to do it, and it takes a lot of time before there's any type of a resolution. So obviously the best way of what we should do is charge people for crimes when they commit crimes. As a former state's attorney or assistant state's attorney, I can tell you that I have prosecuted police officers. In the domestic violence division, we did have a handful of police officers who were accused of that, and it was our policy to treat them just as we did any other person that came into our system. We obviously tried to get rehabilitative help whenever it was possible, but it was something that we were pretty forward with. But that doesn't mean that anyone else knew what happened, or that frankly, we did the right thing in every single case. And so it is my plan when I'm elected as state's attorney to create Kane County's first Citizens Review Board. Now, I've looked at a lot of local communities, including Cook County, to see what they do, how they do this checks and balances, as Eric had said. And what I've done is I've created a document that we're hopefully going to be doing in a Facebook Live event soon, where we're going to have 7 people from our community. They're living, working, they're here in Kane County. We're going to have a mixture of people who are attorneys so that they're familiar with the system, at least 1 investigator. And this is the most important thing. We need at least 2 people from Aurora, at least 2 people from Elgin, because that's primarily where all of our cases come from. Does that mean that's where all of our crime is? Absolutely not. We have crime in the Tri-Cities as well, but that's where we have targeted policing right now. So we need individuals who are representative of our actual community, and we're also going to make sure that there is a certain percentage of people who are people of color on this Citizens Review Board. This Citizens Review Board is independent from the state's attorney's office. We provide them with the information, the police reports, everything that goes along with any case where a police officer is accused of a crime, or any case that's charged where there's an allegation of misconduct by the police officer. The Citizens Review Board would have access to one of the investigators who would be able to subpoena additional information if that was necessary. And then they are allowed to publicly say whether or not they agree with what the state's attorney's office did, or they disagree with it and why. So what I'm doing is that I'm putting it into the hands of the citizens to be able to review everything and then to publicly state what it is that we are doing. That is the best thing. That is how we provide transparency. That is how we provide accountability. And frankly, that I think will increase the community's belief in the criminal justice system when they get an actual role in it. And so this is something I've been very vocal about during the entirety of my campaign. We finally have it in a version that we're ready to print and put out before the election happens. Because my plan is the day that I take office in December, that's going to be one of the first policies that we put in place.
I had a follow-up question. How would the Citizens Review Board be chosen?
That's a great question. So we've kind of gone back and forth with that. The initial review board would be, obviously people would volunteer to do it, but it would be selected by myself as well as the public defender in Kane County. And we also want to bring in a private attorney, a criminal defense attorney. So that way it's two people on the defense side with the advice of me. Every person after that, so of the 7-person panel, if somebody decides not to do another term, the panel solely picks the next individual. It would have nothing to do with the state's attorney's office, so that it's completely independent.
Wonderful. All right. I'm going to jump to the clerk of the courts. Ms. Adams, if and when you're elected, what would be your first order of business to improve on the position?
Yeah, so the thing that's most near and dear to my heart is really bringing more accessibility to expungements here in DuPage County. I volunteered at the Expungement Summit in Cook County, and the number of people that show up to that and the number of attorneys that volunteer to help people with expungements is overwhelming. And it's sponsored through the clerk's office to help with waiving of fees, providing some staffing if necessary, some resources in terms of technology, things like that. That's one of the major projects that I would like to work on as soon as I get into office. There's also expungements that are happening, and there's a 3-year timeline for marijuana-related charges. And the current clerk has it as a 3-year process. And I would like to speed up that process. So the quicker that people can get their records expunged, the quicker that they can move on to bigger and better things. So that will be one of my first priorities when I get elected to this office.
Are there any crimes that are not expungible?
There's a ton of crimes that are not expungible, but when you are able to expunge your record, it can change your life. I'll give you an example of an expungement that I most recently did. A woman 15 years ago was set up by a police officer. It's a true story. Ultimately, he went to jail for what he did to her and a variety of other people. But he had set her up in order to get her to flip, to aid him to help do other criminal activity. She was arrested by him, so she has an arrest record. But she was ultimately, the charges were dropped because they were made aware of the police misconduct. That charge, or not that charge, but that arrest on her record prevented her from some housing, came up on job applications, and deterred her from applying to different jobs. So the expungements that we can do for arrests where you're not found guilty and other expungible offenses, especially related to marijuana use, is why it's so important to me.
All right, thank you. Mental illness is has been in the papers and been in the media quite a bit. When there's a clear case of mental illness, how do we handle those cases so that we show a great deal of sensitivity to the person and the family of that person who's clearly under some sort of stress? And I'm going to direct that question to Ms. Moser, I'm sorry.
So, thank you. We have a significant amount of people that come into our system that are struggling with mental health issues, and the accessibility of treatment is something that they just don't have, whether or not it's knowing where the resources are, knowing whether, how to pay for it. Then the problem is you have these issues, and sometimes it leads to criminal behavior. So for me, for the purposes of being a state's attorney, is that we need to look at this, and we need to look at every single case that comes before us. Now, every case is obviously looked at based on the safety of the community. We have to make sure that our community is safe. And the best way to do that, obviously, is to make sure that people have access to mental health services. We also have to do this at a rate much quicker than what we're doing right now. One of the things that I'd like to bring to Kane County is a program that is called LEAD, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. It is a community-based program that looks at the needs of the people at the time that the arrest could happen. And if the law enforcement believes that it has something to do with mental health or drug addiction, instead of arresting them, instead of putting them in the jail, instead of them making them stay 1 or 2 nights before they even get to bond call, they're actually referring them immediately through treatment through a contract with the state's attorney's office. So we're getting people into treatment quicker. And we're obviously in this case looking at the nonviolent, low-level offenders, just trying to get them out of the system. So then when you do this, you're obviously preventing them. You're not having them go through a court system where they're paying court fees, they're missing work, they're not getting into treatment yet. For those individuals, though, that do get arrested and are into our system, we have to look at what they're doing. We have to look at the background, what comes before us, and we have to get evaluations. In Kane County, we have a fantastic diagnostic center that has the ability to review and interview people who come through our system. And they make great recommendations, and they also know the different resources that we have in Kane County, where if a person is suffering from a certain diagnosis, they can go here to get the best type of treatment. If somebody needs inpatient services, this is somewhere they can go. We need to review all of that for every level of case. I can't tell you how many times that we have had people come in who have committed horrific violent offenses, but it doesn't have anything to do with volition so much as a mental health issue. I had a person who had never had a criminal act in his entire life. He was 60 years old. He'd been in the Vietnam War, came back with PTSD, not diagnosed, had a head injury and was so slowly getting worse. His wife went to bed that night and woke up 3 days later in the hospital because he had beat her almost to death. Now that is an individual that we were able to put into a treatment facility because we knew it was mental health. It had nothing to do with him being a violent criminal. But being in the facility made it safe for him, for his wife, and for the community. So we always need to take that into consideration when we have somebody in our system.
Okay, I'm going to switch that one over to Rinehart.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jamie said. I agree with the LEAD program that she is talking about. It's important, as we've seen after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, that we have first responders who are trained to deal with mental health crises, and that it's not that somebody, an experienced person, is making a decision about whether we're sending police versus mental health responders to a situation. And so I agree with everything really that Jamie said. We have to make it a priority in our courthouses, in our police stations, and so that we can reverse the epidemic of mental health problems that we've seen. Lake County has a great mental health court, which was founded many years ago by our judges here, and it's really the crown jewel of our programs because it's so intensive. Because you have to see a judge once a week, and you have to meet with your caseworker, and you meet with your lawyer and your social worker and your mental health counselor, and they make sure that you're taking your meds, and they make sure that you have housing. There's a lot of linkages, which are great. The particular problem in Lake County is that a lot of people are excluded from that wrongfully, in my opinion, because of their past. Instead of dealing with the circumstances of where somebody is in their life, kind of taking them where they are in that moment, you can be excluded in Lake County based on something 5-10 years ago. I don't agree with that, and that's a change that we're going to make. We also have a unique problem in Lake County, which is that the current state's attorney's office frequently requires people to plead into mental health court. So they have to actually say they're guilty. Now, they're not unfit for trial. What unfit for trial means is that you're so mentally ill that you can't understand what's going on. So they're not unfit, but they're also mentally ill. And I had a client named, I'll call her Sherry. That's not her real name. But I had a client named Sherry whose only crime was that while she was being arrested for a disorderly conduct in the middle of a mental health problem, her coat had hit the police officer. And I watched it. It was like an NFL replay. I must have watched that coat hitting the lip 50, 100 times. And I'm showing it to every assistant state's attorney and every supervisor. She needed help. And they wouldn't accept her into our mental health court because she wouldn't say she was guilty. I don't know if she was guilty of trying to hit the officer or knowingly hitting the officer. So she didn't get the help she needed. And I had to go to court 22 times in a felony courtroom until I finally convinced somebody to drop the case. That's a good thing that the case was dropped and that she didn't go to jail. It's a bad thing that she didn't get the help she needed, which she could have gotten if they didn't require her to plead guilty. So that's an issue that's very close to me, is if we have somebody who's mentally ill, we need to get them the help rather than putting them into some difficult decisions about guilt or innocence. And the point is they need help. Maybe they've made a mistake, but we don't need to put them into that decision when they're in the middle of mental health problems.
Okay, thank you. There is, and I'm going to paraphrase Article 2 of the Constitution. It says that you have the right to bear arms with a well-regulated militia. I think people forget that piece of it and think that they can just have whatever they want to have. And I understand that the sensitivity around that whole issue. But my question is, and this is for anyone on the panel, how do you feel when you see people show up in public events and in public spaces with weapons of war? That can be anyone.
So I can start with this. We have an issue in Aurora recently where they were asking for $88,000 for our police department for riot gear. And a bunch of the community members came in and objected to it. And they were able to block it in the beginning, but then it ultimately went through. And so in the same day, I had a conversation with one of my police officer friends out there who is a white male. And he was frustrated that it was blocked originally. And he's like, I just want to go home at night. I want to feel safe. And so I talked to him about a woman who I had spoken to that was at the protest, and she was there with family, and it was a peaceful protest. And then all of a sudden there was a bus full of police officers who came out all decked out in riot gear, and how terrified it made her feel, and how it struck in a bunch of people the fight or flight instinct. I would be the same way if I was out and all of a sudden I saw somebody come out with what looked like they were going to war. It doesn't look like it's protecting, it looks scary and it looks terrifying. And both of those perspectives, you know, they had value, both of them did, but when you see somebody with a weapon for war, it automatically puts in you this instinct of something to do, and it doesn't make you feel safe in our community. So I'm not a fan of it.
Okay. And I guess what comes to mind is viewing Michigan, where we had people with weapons of war standing over the gallery of our legislators and the governor with weapons of war. Should that be outlawed or something made, some law against that? How do you feel about that, Eric?
Yeah, I think it should be. I think that certainly other states seem to have these open carry laws which I've heard the very theoretical argument that, well, at least you know who has what, but it also leads to a completely different feeling when you're talking about democracy, and when you're talking about the other, frankly, more important rights when it comes to the freedom of speech and the freedom to gather and the freedom to protest and the freedom to vote. Would those same men, and they were primarily men, would those same men be allowed to gather around a polling place? If they're allowed in the Capitol, why wouldn't they be allowed 100 feet or 10 feet or whatever from a polling place? And so that type of open intimidation should never be allowed. It's heartbreaking, frankly, that this is the point where we are at some parts of our democracy. I'm sort of an optimist. I do think that I do think that that we're going to get through this pretty terrible period. But sometimes that's easier for me to say as a white male too. But I think that is the type of thing where we just need to outlaw those types of displays in the places of government or the places of voting. Would they have been allowed to be near a courthouse, maybe where a jury was assembling or where a possible jury is assembling? Frankly, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that those types of open displays can be permitted near these sorts of government activities or these activities of democracy.
Thank you. That leads me, and I'm glad you brought that up. That leads me to question for Ms. Pedersen. If you were, as a judge, how do you feel that you could protect your court and your jury when we have a society that feels that these weapons of war can be brought anywhere? And you're on a case where you have to protect the identities and the safety of the people that are standing in judgment in the trial. Is there anything that you could do?
Well, no, I mean, this is very interesting conversations, and I have opinions here, but as a judge, my role is to uphold the laws of the state of Illinois. And those laws are written by our legislature, and they come through case law as well from our upper courts and our appellate courts and our Supreme Courts, both in Illinois and in the United States. My job will be to uphold those laws, okay? Now, I think what you were asking, or I'm going to kind of dig into it about whether or not how people are feeling safe in a courtroom and things to that measure. Absolutely, safety in the courtroom is important. We have measures. Guns are not allowed in our courthouses. Even though we are a concealed carry state and you can have a gun license, you cannot bring a gun into a courtroom or into a courthouse. So for that measure, I mean, I do believe our courtrooms are safe. We do have public court trials, and except for in juvenile matters. And that is foundationally a part of our democracy, is open and public trials. And in these open and public trials, the names of the defendants, the names of witnesses are, yes, out there for the public to know. But that is part of the system that we have right now. Juror identity, on the other hand, is not. Jurors are given juror ID numbers. In my courtroom, they will not be, their names will not be said out loud. We can identify them by their juror ID number, and that's information that only the attorneys and the judges in the case have. Because jurors, we are asking to come in from the community to do their civic duty to sit on a jury. And we do owe them a measure of privacy, absolutely, especially when we have public trials that are, where people can sit in. And then quite frankly, there are trials and there are cases that could be televised. And we do have a measure of, should be afforded a measure of anonymity in those situations. Those jurors should be, and their identities should be protected. But as a judge, and this issue of weapons, all I will do and what I will do is I will uphold the laws as they're written on the books. And if those laws were to change to constrict who can have guns or where guns can be, then I will uphold them now. If they open up and allow more access to guns, again, it will be my job to uphold the law.
Thank you. We have about...
If I may, I'm so sorry. I've been getting text messages from my mother. Apparently one of my little girls is having some issues. She's got a fever and my mom's unsure of what to do, who's watching them. I do need to sign off a little early here at 8 o'clock. I just wanted to let you know. So if we're in the middle of questioning, I'm just going to have to leave because I do need to get home and figure out if I have to take a child to the doctor or not right now.
Well, we never stop being a parent. So if you have to go, we understand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to ask each person to give me 2 minutes and answer the question of what does Black Lives Matter mean to you? And we can start with Eric.
Well, I'm glad I don't have to just say one word. I was thinking it was like, justice, but the Black Lives Matter has been Black Lives Matter, and the Black Lives Matter movement has been critical in the last few months to revealing what many people on this call may already know, that we have deep problems in our legal system and frankly in our society when it comes to institutionalized racism. And I went to many, many rallies during June and July and saw a lot of pain and anger that even as somebody who was very aware of this as a defense attorney and as a public defender, I saw a new level, and I saw a new anguish in our streets, particularly with young people who just did not see how a legal system or frankly a political system could address this problem. So in that way, this election could not be more important in many different ways other than what we all think about at the top of the ticket. But when it comes to this being the moment in our country where we do the best we can to address racial justice in a way that we haven't, at least in my lifetime. Certainly the civil rights movement is the next is the earlier phase, but this has to be a defining moment in our country when we finally say that the legal system will change. But I want to say something that I think is very important and is another part of this. When we say Black Lives Matter, typically and correctly, we are thinking about how the police interact with people on the streets, whether or not they're treating everybody with dignity, whether they are following the law themselves when they are interacting with individuals of color on the streets. But in the courthouse, at least in my county, I think Black Lives Matter has a different meaning, which is when we get to victims and survivors of crime, because the current state's attorney's office in my county hasn't cared about victims of color. So it's not just Black Lives Matter when we're talking about arrests, but also when we're talking about how justice is meted out for victims of color. And that's been something that's been very important in my campaign because at least in my county, we've seen so many victims of color be ignored by a state's attorney's office that has never cared. And so to me, it's really, and they're equal sides of the coin. We have to make sure that justice is truly blind, and we have to make sure that our judges, our police, and our prosecutors are getting the training they need, or frankly, if they don't have the right values, that they're getting out. And that's what my campaign has been about.
Okay, I'm gonna switch it over and give Brittany an opportunity before she has to go, just to give me about a minute or two or whatever because I know you gotta go.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And I will go after this. Listen, Black Lives Matters is just that. It's that our lives matter, that my life matters, that my children's life matters, that my mother's life matters, and that my brother's lives matters, and all of our Black brothers and sisters' lives matters. The fact that we still have to say that out loud is because, unfortunately, in our society, Black lives and Black people have been so pushed to the side, so ostracized, so removed from the systems of power in all levels, that we have to basically remind people that we're human here too, and that we can't be an afterthought, and that we cannot be treated differently anymore. This is not just in criminal justice. Yes, it is right now because of the egregious, and just so we're clear, this is the renewal of the Black Lives Matters movement. This is not the start what happened here this spring. Black Lives Matters has been a concept, and it's been a movement that's been going on for years now. Like all things, when it comes to civil rights, even when we go back to the 50s and we go back to the 60s, it is the scenes of the atrocities of protesters peacefully protesting in the South and in and around the South against Jim Crow segregation, being mowed down, beaten, sprayed with water hoses, bitten by dogs. It was those terrible images that brought to light, oh my goodness, there's a problem here, but that problem had been in existence for hundreds of years in the southern part of our country. The reason that the Black Lives Matters movement is holding on, and it seems like it has to do with police brutality, because we can now see these images of police brutality. We are watching the videos of Black men, children, and women being murdered by police and being hurt by police. But really what it is, it's about that at all levels of society, our access to the protections of this country, the laws under this country, and all of the wonderful institutions in this country. This includes education, economic advantages, and jobs. And this absolutely includes a fair and just judiciary. Like Garrick just said, it's about not just how we treat defendants, but how we treat victims. It's about how we don't look into the societies and the neighborhoods of Black people and over-police them when the same crimes are happening in those neighborhoods are happening 5 miles up the street in the white neighborhood. But because we focus all of our policing in these Black neighborhoods, we have disproportionate Black men and women incarcerated and charged with crimes. This is about just addressing and really digging in and dealing with all the levels of the systematic racism that we see and all the levels of the systematic differences and biases that people have towards people of color, specifically Black people. I find it just a wonderful thing, the amount of awareness that I'm seeing from the community, from our white community, from our Hispanic community, about their own self-revelations about their own biases. And that's just exactly what it is. We have to be aware. We are human. I understand that we are flawed, but we have to be aware that we have biases. All of us do. And when we are aware of them, then we are aware of how our actions are reflective of those biases, and we can stop acting in a way that is biased towards other individuals. And so, you know, I'm a supporter of the Black Lives Matters movement. It is a movement that is about my life, my family's life. And I should say that I think that through the chaos that we may be feeling as a society right now, change always does come. And I am excited for the change that I do believe is coming and will come because of this renewed movement in our society. We have a long ways to go for civil justice, and we're gonna get there.
Okay, I'm running out of time right now. I am so pleased to have talked to you. I could do this for another hour. I wish I had time to get the other candidates' words on Black Lives Matter, but it is now 8 o'clock and I'm out of time. Hopefully, Patrick can put another one together. I would love to do this again. It was great. We got some real solid and poignant answers from each of you, and I hope that the audience has got enough and a good feel for you as candidates, and hope that we know we're educated now. We're a lot more educated, and we know what we need to do when we get to that ballot box. So thank you for spending your time and your evening with us. I'll turn it back over to Patrick.
Right. Michael, thank you for moderating today. I also want to thank the panel for being here. For those that have a little bit of time, if you want to give a plug just to your websites or any events that you have coming up, please, I want to give you a couple of minutes to do that, and then we will close out. I know we started a little late today, so I just want to give you that little bit of extra time to plug your websites or any events that you have coming up. Let's go ahead and start with Eric.
Muted, Eric.
You know, you would think that I would finally just have the website already cut and paste to put in. Check out my website. A lot of my plans are there. This has been great. It's great to talk about this. You know, sometimes we're just introducing ourselves to people and we have 10 things to talk about, but to be able to talk about racial justice in this concentrated way has been great. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. And for everyone that's viewing us on Facebook and YouTube, that is Rinehart for Lake county.com, and we'll put that into the notes section of those sites as well. Jamie?
So mine is Mosser, M-O-S-S-E-R, for kanecounty.com. We also have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We don't have a lot of events, but we do have a lot of volunteer opportunities. So If you go on there, you can get signs. We can have car magnets. We have shirts. We have postcards, a lot of great postcard stuff, phone banking, which I know everybody loves. And then we're also safely dropping literature on doors. We're not knocking on doors. We're just safely doing that. So if you're willing to give of your sign, or I mean of your time, and you would like a sign in your yard, just contact me. I put my website in the notes.
Thank you. And Candice.
So my website is CandiceAdams2020.com. I'm also on Facebook as well. In terms of events, we do door-to-door lit drop where you're not talking to anybody, you're just dropping in lit for me and for a variety of candidates in DuPage County every Saturday and Sunday. So if you visit my website or email me, I can get you more information on those activities.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. We are a week away from people casting ballots. People will start to vote in a week. So it's very critical that if you all care about what these candidates spoke about today, that you help them with their campaigns, whether it's phone banking or lit drops or other activities that they have going, or donating to their campaigns. Please do help them in any way that you can. Also, we have a voter protection team that we have started up. If you all are interested in joining us, being a poll watcher or helping with the elections in any way, please let us know. We'll put that as well into the notes section. You can join our team to help watch various polling places and ensure that everyone's vote counts. I hope that you all can join us on October the 1st when we will have our next town hall. That town hall is going to deal with the economy and finance. We're also going to have a wonderful array of candidates for that particular town hall as well. And I hope that you all are able to join us for that. I want to turn it over to Nancy Shepherdson now to close us out. Nancy?
Okay. Well, all I could think of during this panel is if these candidates are elected, we are going to move much closer to justice in our counties than we have before. So I'm so impressed with our candidates and what they bring to the party. And so, as Patrick said, we just need to work very hard for them. And because they are so far down on the ballot, some of them do have a problem getting volunteers and getting people to help them out. And so if you have a choice of candidates to pick from, I would recommend very highly that you work for these candidates. We have a ton of good candidates this time, but I think the ones that are working for justice are doing a wonderful job and have great ideas about what they want to do to improve those offices. And I also wanted to thank Michael Childress, who did a wonderful job with being our moderator tonight and asked a lot of great questions that were so interesting. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you join us on October 1st and have a great evening. Thank you.
Everyone.